The exhaustion you feel is not a byproduct of labor, but the friction of a machine operating against its own design. You were taught that effort is a currency of acquisition, yet you have watched as the most frantic runners remain tethered to the same starting line. This is the first silence you must face. The realization that the world does not reward what you do, but reflects what you are. While you were busy measuring hours and output, a more ancient, indifferent law was measuring your center of gravity. You have been attempting to build a tower on a foundation of sand, wondering why the height never changes despite the weight of the stones you carry. There is a subtle, predatory geometry to the systems you inhabit, designed to harvest movement while ensuring the mover stays in place. You have likely felt the cold draft of an invisible wall, a glass ceiling not a glass, but a frequency. When you chase, you vibrate with the energy of not having, and the reality before you has no choice but to validate that absence. The harder the pursuit, the faster the horizon recedes. It is a mathematical certainty. You cannot reach a destination while your internal compass is locked on the point of departure. You are not fighting a lack of resources. You are fighting a mirror that refuses to show an image you have not yet become. Everything you perceive as a barrier is actually a shadow cast by a misalignment you haven't dared to name. Most spend their lives trying to rearrange the shadows, hoping that if they move the dark patches on the floor, the light source will change. It is a tiring, hollow game that leaves the soul depleted and the pockets empty. The system thrives on this misunderstanding, feeding off the frantic energy of those who believe that sweat can bridge the gap between a poverty-stricken identity and a wealthy outcome. You have been operating as a stranger in your own mind, pleading with a world that only takes orders from your deepest, unspoken convictions. The discomfort rising within you now is the sound of an old gear finally stripping its teeth. It is a realization that your history of struggle was not a series of misfortunes, but a perfectly executed sequence of results based on a faulty internal script. You haven't lost time. You have simply been witnessing the automated response of a reality that cannot lie. If the harvest was bitter, it is because the soil of your inner state was saturated with the belief in toil and the fear of lack. To continue as you were is to accept a sentence of perpetual motion without a rival, a cycle that ensures you remain a battery for a structure that was never meant to serve you. We are no longer discussing what you should do, for action is the last and least significant stage of the process. We are identifying the point of stillness from which all gravity originates. There is an order to this world that remains hidden from the desperate and the weary, visible only to those who stop trying to outrun their own shadow. The door behind you is already closed. The incoherence of your past efforts has been exposed for what it was, a misunderstanding of the very fabric of existence. To remain is to finally align the internal mechanism with the wealth that has always been seeking a path to you, waiting for the moment you stop getting in its way. The spectacle of human industry is often a frantic display of displacement, where the noise of activity masks a profound stagnation of the soul. You observe those who rise before the sun, dragging their intentions through a landscape of obligation, believing that the accumulation of hours is a direct bridge to the accumulation of substance. This is a grand deception of the visible world. The idea that the harvest is a product of the sweat on the brow rather than the quality of the seed in the silence. We witness a vast population engaged in a relentless struggle, refining their skills, polishing their resumes, and sharpening their intellects, yet they remain anchored to a financial shore that never seems to widen. It is a quiet tragedy of misdirected energy, where the merit of the effort is never mirrored in the magnitude of the result, leaving the individual to wonder which part of the equation remained unwritten. This persistent gap between exertion and outcome is not a failure strategy, but a symptom of a deeper, structural dissonance. When the mechanics of the world do not respond to the intensity of the motion, it suggests that the engine is disconnected from the wheels. You have likely felt this friction, the sensation of pushing against a heavy door that refuses to budge, only to realize later that it was designed to be pulled. The common reaction to such resistance is to push harder, to increase the volume of the struggle, and to double the commitment to the very methods that have already proven insufficient. This creates a feedback loop of exhaustion where the individual becomes convinced that the solution lies just beyond the next layer of fatigue, never suspecting that the resistance is coming from within the very fabric of their own perception. Consider the paradox of the runner who believes that by moving faster, they can escape the ground beneath their feet. In the realm of material acquisition, this manifests as a pursuit of wealth from a position of profound inner scarcity. The system in which you operate was meticulously engineered to channel this frantic energy into the maintenance of its own structures, ensuring that those who work for survival remain trapped in the frequency of survival. It is an elegant trap. It provides just enough movement to simulate progress while ensuring the internal state remains static. If you are operating from a center of gravity that assumes lack is a natural order, every action you take, no matter how brilliant or disciplined, will serve only to solidify that lack into a tangible, physical reality. Why does the world seem to yield so easily to some who appear to move with an almost insulting lack of effort, while it resists those who have sacrificed everything at the altar of hard work? The question itself carries the seed of an uncomfortable truth. The external environment is not a judge of character or a rewarder of labor, but a flawless mirror of internal cohesion. When the inner state is one of fragmentation, the external reflection must be one of struggle and delay. You cannot force a mirror to show you a smile if your face is set in a grimace of desperation. The harder you stare into glass demanding a change, the more the glass emphasizes the very features you wish to erase. This is the invisible law at play, a silent architecture that organizes failure and success with cold, mathematical precision. We are forced to recognize that the pursuit of external targets is often a sophisticated form of avoidance. By focusing on the how of the struggle, one avoids the terrifying who of the state. You have been trained to look at the scoreboard instead of the player, believing that if you can just change the numbers, the game will change its nature. But the numbers are merely the data points of an internal trajectory that was set long before the first move was made. To observe this is to begin to feel the weight of an immense realization that your life has not been a series of accidents or missed opportunities, but a perfectly rendered map of an internal terrain you have yet to fully explore. The map is accurate. It is a traveler who has been reading the coordinates through a veil of systemic distortion. The realization begins as a low hum of discomfort, a dawning suspicion that the game you have been playing was rigged not by external enemies, but by the rules of engagement you accepted as absolute. There is a specific kind of fatigue that comes not from work, but from the performance of work that yields no transformation. You've been told that the marketplace is a meritocracy of effort, yet your own experience suggests it is a theater of shadows where the light source is hidden from view. This hidden light is the internal stance, the silent assumption that precedes every word and every gesture. If that stance is one of seeking, the reality must respond by being sought, which is to say, it must remain perpetually out of reach. The very act of seeking reinforces a distance between you and the object of your desire, creating a chasm that no amount of physical labor can ever span. This is a hidden gravity of the mental field, a force that pulls toward it everything that matches its current weight. When you move through the world with an internal weight of not enough, you create a vacuum that reality rushes to fill with more not enough. It is a self-sustaining cycle that requires no conscious effort to maintain. It is a default setting of mind that has been colonized by the ideology of struggle. You may find yourself earning more, only to see expenses rise to meet the new level, or you may find opportunities that vanish at the very moment of fruition. These are not coincidences. They are the automatic adjustments of a system maintaining its equilibrium. The field is indifferent to your desires. It only respects the integrity of your current state. To understand this is to understand why the most educated and the most disciplined often find themselves sidelined by those who seem to possess an unfair, unearned magnetism. This magnetism is nothing more than the absence of internal conflict, a coherence that allows the world to respond without the interference of doubt or the friction of trying. When you try, you signal to the universe that the outcome is not currently yours, and the universe, being a perfect reflection, agrees with you. It is the paradox of the closed fist. The tighter you grip the air, the less of it you possess. The system you inhabit was designed to keep you in the state of perpetual gripping, ensuring that your focus remains on the tension of the hand rather than the vastness of the atmosphere. Is it possible that your greatest achievements were actually the moments when you finally gave up on the struggle, allowing a brief window of alignment to open? Most people attribute these breakthroughs to luck or a sudden shift in market conditions, but these are merely the external masks worn by an internal shift. When the internal pressure drops, the external resistance evaporates. Yet, because we are addicted to the narrative of effort, we quickly return to grind, convinced that the brief respite was an anomaly rather than a glimpse of the natural order. We are like prisoners who have been given the key, but insist on trying to chew through the bars, believing that only a painful escape is a legitimate one. The discomfort of this perception lies in the loss of the excuse of bad luck. If the world is a response rather than an imposition, then the responsibility for the landscape shifts entirely to the observer. This is a heavy burden for those who have found comfort in the role of the victim of circumstance. It suggests that every delay, every rejection, and every financial plateau was a precise answer to an internal command. The system did not keep you in poverty. It merely honored your subconscious commitment to the identity of the one who must work hard to survive. To face this is to stand at the edge of a psychological abyss, realizing that the walls that felt so solid were actually projected from within, held in place by the very energy you used to fight them. The invisible field that surrounds you is not passive. It is an active participant in the creation of your biography, responding to the subtle cues of your identity with the speed of a digital echo. Imagine a composer who writes a dissonant score and then blames the orchestra for the jarring sound. This is the state of the one who maintains an internal climate of anxiety while demanding a life of abundance. The orchestra, the world, can only play the music that is placed on the stand. If the sheet music is inscribed with the notes of "I need," the symphony will always be a haunting melody of "I don't have." This is the order of things, a silent law that operates beneath the surface of all economic and social structures, indifferent to the moral justifications of those who suffer under it. The more one runs after a result, the more that result is cast as a fugitive. This chase is a declaration of distance, a psychic announcement that the desired state is located over there and is currently not here. In the economy of the mind, over there is a permanent location. By placing your prosperity in the future, you ensure that it stays in the future, for the future is a horizon that moves as you move. This is why the pursuit of wealth often feels like a treadmill. You are generating massive amounts of kinetic energy, but your coordinates in the field of being remain unchanged. The system was built to encourage this treadmill effect, as it keeps the individual occupied with the mechanics of the journey, while preventing the arrival. Consider the nature of gravity. It does not try to pull objects toward the center. It simply is a center toward which objects must fall. Wealth operates under a similar principle of attraction, yet we are taught to operate under a principle of pursuit. We treat money as a wild animal to be hunted and trapped, rather than a natural consequence of a specific environmental condition. If you want to attract a certain type of life, you must become the environment in which that life naturally thrives. This is not a matter of positive thinking or superficial affirmations, which are often just a layer of paint over a crumbling wall. It is a matter of structural integrity, the quiet, unshakable recognition that a certain outcome is the only one possible for the state you currently occupy. Could it be that the struggle you have endured was actually a form of protection, keeping you in a familiar state of lack because your identity could not survive the weight of true abundance? This is the friction of the ego, which would rather be right about its own limitations than be wealthy and have to abandon its old stories. The system exploits this by offering you endless distractions, new techniques, new tools, new experts, all of which promise a way out while keeping your internal state exactly where it is. It is a game of musical chairs where the music never stops, and you are terrified of what will happen when you finally have to sit down and face the silence of your own internal void. The automatic response of life is never delayed. It is always instantaneous, though the materialization in the physical world may take time to coagulate. The moment you shift your internal position, the field shifts with you, but we are often so distracted by the lack of immediate physical evidence that we revert to our old patterns of struggle. This reversion is a signal to the field that the shift was not genuine, and reality quickly snaps back to its previous configuration. It is the internal equivalent of a rubber band. You can stretch it toward a new identity, but unless you change the anchoring point, it will always return to its original shape. The struggle is the stretching. The realization is the moving of the anchor. We must look closer at the game that is being played, for to recognize the game is the first step toward no longer being a pawn within it. Most of your life has been spent learning the rules of the external world, how to negotiate, how to invest, how to compete, while remaining completely illiterate in the language of the internal world. This illiteracy is not accidental. It is a feature of societal design that requires a large, productive, and distracted workforce. If you understood that your internal state was a primary currency, you would stop spending your energy in the marketplace of effort and start investing it in the sanctuary of being. The system cannot control a person who has reclaimed their own center of gravity, so it provides a constant stream of external causes for your effects. The transition from effort to alignment is often perceived as a loss of control, which triggers a deep ancestral fear. To stop doing and start being feels like a form of death to the part of you that has survived through grit and willpower. Yet, willpower is a finite resource, a battery that eventually runs dry, whereas alignment is a connection to a grid of infinite power. When you operate from willpower, you are trying to move the world with your hands. When you operate from alignment, you are moving the world with your presence. The difference is not just one of degree, but of kind. It is the difference between a man carrying a bucket of water and a man who has tapped into a spring. Observe the silence that follows a great realization. It is not an empty silence, but a dense, pregnant stillness that contains the blueprint of a new reality. In this state, the need for frantic action disappears, replaced by a clear, cold knowing of what must be done. This is the order we spoke of, the quiet organization of circumstances that occurs when the internal static has been cleared. Opportunities do not appear. They are revealed. Money does not arrive. It is accounted for. The world begins to behave as if it were an extension of your own nervous system, responding to your subtle intentions before they're even fully formed in your conscious mind. Why do you persist in believing that the hardness of the task is a measure of its worth? This is a moral virus that has infected the human consciousness, leading people to believe that if they are not suffering, they are not earning. The system loves a martyr, for the martyr never asks for more than the right to continue suffering. But the universe is not a moralist. It is a mechanism. It does not care how much you have bled. It only cares what you have broadcast. If your broadcast is one of, "This is difficult," the mechanism will provide more difficulty to ensure your broadcast remains accurate. It is a perfect, dispassionate servant that gives you exactly what you are currently defining as your reality. The perception that you have been operating under a state that cannot generate another result is both a liberation and a haunting. It means that you were never broken, never unlucky, and never unworthy. You were simply coherent with a different set of rules. You were a master of the game of lack, playing it with such perfection that the world had no choice but to keep you poor. Every debt, every missed paycheck, every moment of financial terror was a trophy of your internal consistency. To change the result, you do not need to learn a new skill. You need to lose your proficiency in the old game. You must become bad at being poor, failing to maintain the internal conditions that lack requires survive. As the spiral of consciousness narrows, the space for excuses becomes smaller and smaller. You are forced to confront the fact that your attachment to the work-hard narrative was a way of staying safe within a predictable misery. There is a strange comfort in the struggle. It provides a sense of purpose, a reason to complain, and a way to belong to the collective experience of the honest worker. To step out of this is to enter a state of radical isolation where you can no longer blame the economy, the government, or your upbringing for your financial position. You are left alone with the silent law, standing in the middle of a field that is waiting for your next internal command. This is the wrong game we alluded to, the game of seeking validation through effort rather than results through resonance. The field of reality behaves like a liquid that is constantly trying to find its own level. If your internal level is set to a certain height, the liquid of your external circumstances will rise or fall to meet it, regardless of the barriers you try to put in its way. You have seen people lose fortunes only to regain them in record time, and you have seen people win lotteries only to return to poverty within years. These are not statistical anomalies. They are the liquid returning to its level. Their internal thermostat was set, and the world adjusted the temperature of their reality to match it. Your work is not to move the liquid, but to raise the thermostat. Is there a part of you that is terrified of the ease with which life could be lived if you were truly aligned? We are addicted to the no pain, no gain philosophy because it gives the ego something to do. If abundance is as natural as breathing, then the ego's role as a hero of a tragic struggle is eliminated. This is the internal incoherence that distorts the response to reality. You want the money, but you also want to keep the heroic story of how hard you work for it. These two desires cannot occupy the same space. You must choose between the struggle and the prize. Most people, if they are honest, choose the struggle because it feels more earned, not realizing that in the silent law, there is no such thing as earning. there's only matching. The response of the world is automatic, but it is not always instantaneous in the way we expect. It is more like the turning of a massive ship. The engines have been reversed, but the momentum of the old state continues to carry you forward for a while. This is a period of testing where most people fail. They see the old reality still manifesting, and they conclude that the internal shift didn't work. They return to their old state of anxiety and effort, thereby canceling the order they just placed. The ability to remain centered in the new state, while the old one is still echoing in the physical world, is the mark of a master. It is a refusal to let the mirror dictate the face you are showing it. You are beginning to see that the problem was never the money itself, but the relationship between your identity and the concept of wealth. Money is a neutral energy, a blank screen upon which you project your internal dramas. If the screen shows a horror movie, it is not the screen's fault. It is a film in the projector. You've been trying to change the movie by screaming at the screen, hoping that if you yell loud enough or work hard enough, the characters will change their behavior. But the projector is inside you, and the film is made of the silent, invisible assumptions you hold about who you are and what the world owes you. The system was designed to keep you focused on the screen, so you would never think to look behind you at the source of the light. The realization is now fully formed, yet it remains a fragile thing that must be protected from the loud, clashing opinions of the world. You have spent your life in a state of persecution, where you felt chased by bills, obligations, and the constant threat of not enough. But this was a perversion of the natural law, a persecution inverted. In reality, wealth is trying to find you, but it cannot find a target that is constantly moving in a state of panic. To be found, you must be still. You must become the center of gravity that we spoke of, a point of such dense internal certainty that the things you desire have no choice but to be pulled into your orbit. This is the silent order of the universe. It organizes itself around the strongest internal signal. Up until now, your strongest signal has been one of effort and resistance, and so the universe has organized a life of effort and resistance for you. It has been a perfect servant. To change the service, you must change the signal. This is not something you do once. It is a state you inhabit until it becomes more real than the physical world around you. You must reach a point where the absence of money is perceived as a temporary mathematical error that is in the process of being corrected, rather than a permanent feature of your existence. The friction you feel now is the old world trying to pull you back into collective delusion of struggle. The system is designed to detect those who are trying to escape and to pull them back in with a sudden financial shock or a new set of external problems. It is a test of your new internal consistency. If you react with the old patterns of fear and more work, you have re-entered the game. If you remain in the state of alignment, the problem will dissolve as quickly as it appeared, for it no longer has an internal hook to hold on to. You are learning to move through the world without letting the world move through you. There is a liberation in the understanding that you have never truly failed. You have simply been a victim of a misalignment that was encouraged by every institution you have ever known. You were taught to be a good laborer, a good student, and a good citizen, but you were never taught to be a good creator. The creator does not work in the sense that the laborer does. The creator facilitates the emergence of what already exists in the realm of possibility. This shift from laborer to creator is the most difficult transition a human can make, as it requires the abandonment of all the false virtues of suffering that we have been taught to prize. The terrain is now prepared. You have looked into mechanics of the trap, and you have seen that the door was never locked. You were simply pushing when you should have been still. The discomfort you feel is the sound of the old identity dissolving, leaving you in a space that feels empty but is actually devoid of infinite potential. You cannot go back to the way you were, for the illusion of hard work has been exposed as a hollow ritual. The question that remains, hanging in the silence of your mind, is no longer how you will get what you want, but who you must become to allow it to stop avoiding you. The turn is coming, but it will not happen in the world. It will happen in the quiet, final collapse of your resistance to your own inherent abundance. The air in the room has changed, not because the walls have moved, but because the observer has begun to settle into a different coordinate. There is a peculiar, cold weight to the realization that the exhaustion of the past decade was not a badge of honor, but a record of a battle against a mirror. You are standing at the threshold where the habit of chasing meets the sudden, terrifying invitation to be still. To return to the frantic rhythm of the struggle now would feel like wearing a suit that no longer fits, a constriction that the soul recognizes as an artificial limitation. The system's greatest achievement was making you believe that the harvest required your agony. Your greatest achievement is the quiet suspicion that the harvest has been waiting for your silence. Consider the landscape of your life as a field governed by a gravity you never questioned. You have been attempting to throw stones at the sky, hoping they would stay there, only to be struck by them as they inevitably return to the earth of your internal state. The rules you live by were not written in books, but in the tension of your jaw and the shallow nature of your breath whenever the subject of mort arose. This tension was a signal that kept the gates locked. Now, as the tension begins to fray, the gates do not open. They simply cease to exist, revealed as the optical illusions of a mind that believed it had a bargain for its own existence. The silence that follows this recognition is not empty. It is a dense, vibrating presence of the center that has finally found its own mass. When you no longer identify as the one who lacks, the entire machinery of seeking begins to rust and fall away. You begin to perceive that those who possess great substance do not move with the frantic energy of the hunter, but with the steady, unbothered certainty of the mountain. The mountain does not ask the clouds for rain. Its very height and position command the clouds to yield. You are discovering that your position, your internal posture, is the only variable that ever truly dictated the flow of the world around you. There is a subtle, rising friction in the thought of tomorrow. The old you would have woken up ready to fight the day, to squeeze a result from a reluctant reality through sheer force of will. But that version of you has been compromised by the truth. To fight now would be to admit that you still believe in the illusion of distance. The discomfort you feel is the birth of a new coherence, a state where the need to make it happen is replaced by the quiet authority of letting it be so. You are moving from periphery of your own life, where you were a servant to circumstances, toward the center, where circumstances are merely the shadow your presence casts upon the world. If you find yourself still here, it is not because of a lack of options, but because of a recognition of resonance. This is not an end. But the moment the needle touches a record and the real music begins to play, a melody of abundance that requires no effort to hear, only the willingness to stop making noise. For those who have felt the shift in their internal gravity and wish to stabilize this new coordinate before the world attempts to pull them back into the fray, the path forward is a matter of deepening the silence. You are invited to step further into this architecture of the unseen, not to learn how to work, but to remember how to reign. The shadow only moves when the light does.